I first heard about the fraternity during my first week on campus. Phi Sigma Delta, better known among students as the Sigmas. To most, it was an elite fraternity shrouded in whispers of tradition, wealth, and selective membership. They were untouchable, connected to alumni who seemed to control half the city. My roommate Aaron had grown up hearing about them. "If you get into the Sigmas, you're set for life," he told me as we unpacked boxes in our dorm room. He leaned closer as though someone might overhear, despite the fact we were alone. "They say there's some initiation ritual that's intense as hell. But no one talks about it." Aaron's voice was tinged with reverence, but I only half listened. I wasn't interested in fraternities or college cliques. I'd worked hard to get a scholarship here, and I planned to keep my head down, make the grades, and leave. That was the plan, until I was approached. It happened 3 days later. I was walking back from the library when someone called my name. "Hey! Ethan." The voice was smooth and self-assured. I turned to see a tall guy, maybe 21, dressed in crisp jeans and a dark polo with the Phi Sigma Delta crest embroidered on the chest. He had a smile that was just shy of predatory. "You're Ethan Cross, right? Freshman. Top of your class." He didn't ask so much as state it. "Yeah," I replied, puzzled. "I'm Blake. Phi Sigma Delta president." He extended a hand, and when I shook it, his grip was too firm, like he was testing me. "We've had our eye on you. I think you'd make a good fit for the Sigmas." I didn't know what to say. I looked around, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Gotcha." But Blake was serious. "You're ambitious. Smart. And we like that here." Blake smiled wider, showing perfect white teeth. "Come to our house Friday night. Midnight. It's an invite-only event. Consider this your chance." Before I could respond, he was already walking away, leaving me standing in the empty quad. For the next few days, I tried to ignore it. I didn't belong with those guys. They were rich, influential, the kind of people who always got their way. But curiosity gnawed at me. Why would someone like Blake single me out? By Friday, I convinced myself I'd just check it out. One night. One party. If it wasn't for me, I'd leave. Simple. The fraternity house was on the edge of campus, surrounded by tall oaks that seemed to whisper when the wind blew. By the time I arrived, the place was alive with music and laughter. Students, mostly upperclassmen, poured in and out, clutching red cups. But when I approached the front porch, a massive guy standing guard stopped me. "Name?" "Ethan Cross." He eyed me up and down before stepping aside, muttering, "Welcome." Inside, the house was huge, practically a mansion. The smell of expensive cologne and alcohol lingered in the air. Music thumped from a speaker somewhere deep in the house, but the conversation seemed quieter than I expected. Almost hushed, as though everyone was sharing secrets. I wandered through the crowd, unsure where to go, until I spotted Blake near a grand staircase. He noticed me immediately and raised his drink with a grin. "Ethan. You came." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "I figured I'd check it out." "Good call. Come with me. The real fun's downstairs." He didn't wait for me to agree. I followed him past groups of students until we reached a narrow door at the back of the house. It looked like a basement entrance, old and out of place in the otherwise pristine mansion. Blake unlocked it with a key from his pocket. "What's down there?" I asked, hesitating. "The real initiation." Blake's tone was playful, but his eyes were cold. "Only for the chosen few." Everything in me screamed to turn back, but Blake stepped through the doorway and began descending the stairs. I swallowed hard and followed. The basement was not what I expected. It was dimly lit, with only a handful of antique lanterns casting flickering light. The walls were lined with shelves holding old books and jars filled with substances I couldn't identify. Strange symbols were painted onto the stone floor, symbols that looked ancient, yet meticulously drawn. In the center of the room was a large wooden table. Around it stood a half-dozen guys, all wearing dark cloaks with the fraternity crest stitched on the chest. Blake joined them, his playful demeanor suddenly gone. "Ethan, welcome to the inner circle." I shifted uneasily. "What is this?" "The first step toward greatness," Blake replied. "You've been chosen because you have potential. But potential means nothing without sacrifice." I blinked. "Sacrifice?" One of the cloaked figures stepped forward. He held a small, ornate box in his hands. The wood was carved with the same symbols on the floor, and something about it made my skin crawl. He opened the lid to reveal a gleaming, curved dagger with a black blade. I instinctively took a step back. "What the hell is this?" Blake's smile returned, but it was colder this time. "Don't worry. No one's asking you to hurt anyone, yet." The others chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the basement. "This is a test of loyalty," Blake continued. "A symbolic act to prove you're ready to become one of us." I didn't want to touch that dagger. My mind raced as I tried to come up with an excuse, but Blake's voice cut through my thoughts. "You do want to join us, don't you? Or did you waste our time?" The other cloaked figures turned to stare at me. Their faces were shadowed, unreadable. The lantern light made their eyes gleam like predators in the dark. I felt trapped. I couldn't turn back now, not without making enemies. So I did the only thing I could think of. I stepped forward, reached for the dagger, and wrapped my fingers around the cold handle. "Good," Blake said softly. "Now the ritual can begin." The dagger was heavier than I expected, the black blade gleaming dully in the low light. My hand trembled as I held it, and every instinct I had screamed at me to drop it and run. But I didn't. Blake watched me with that calculating smile, as if he could see the battle happening inside my head. Around me, the cloaked figures shifted, forming a loose circle. Their presence felt oppressive, their gazes like weights pressing against my chest. "Relax, Ethan," Blake said softly. "This isn't what you think." "What is this?" My voice sounded small in the cavernous basement. "A tradition," Blake replied, stepping closer. "A ritual that binds you to Phi Sigma Delta and its legacy. The symbol on the blade represents the blood oath of loyalty. All you have to do is give a drop of blood. A small price to pay for the doors this brotherhood will open for you." I stared at him, unsure whether to believe him. The words sounded polished, rehearsed even, like he'd given this speech 100 times before. "And if I don't?" Blake's smile faltered. The room seemed to grow colder. "You don't want to do that, Ethan. We chose you. Walking away now would be a mistake." The guys in the circle shifted again, subtly tightening around me. There was no longer a way out without pushing through them. I swallowed hard and looked down at the blade. A drop of blood. That's all they wanted. It sounded simple enough, symbolic, even, like something out of a movie. But every nerve in my body told me there was more to it than that. "Go on," Blake coaxed. "It's painless." With no other choice, I raised the blade to my palm. My fingers curled into a fist as I held the edge against my skin. The metal was ice cold, almost numbing, and for a moment I thought I could hear something, a hum, faint and distant, coming from the blade itself. I shook the thought away and pressed harder. The cut was shallow, a thin red line forming across my palm. It stung, but not as much as I'd expected. I watched, transfixed, as a single drop of blood welled up and fell onto the floor. The moment the blood touched the stone, the air in the room seemed to shift. The lantern flames flickered violently, shadows dancing like living things against the walls. The cloaked figures murmured something in unison, a low chant in a language I didn't recognize. The symbols on the floor, symbols I'd assumed were just paint, began to glow faintly, their edges outlined in deep crimson. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. What the hell is happening? The chanting grew louder, reverberating through the room like an echo from somewhere far away. Blake stepped forward, his expression calm, but his eyes were blazing with something I couldn't identify. "Don't panic," he said, though his voice sounded distorted, as if I were hearing it underwater. "It's normal." "Normal? What is this? What did you do to me?" I demanded, clutching my bleeding hand to my chest. Blake didn't answer. Instead, he pointed at the dagger still clutched in my other hand. The blade, once black, now pulsed faintly with light, red and alive, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. I dropped it with a clatter, the sound cutting through the chant like a gunshot. The chanting stopped abruptly. The cloaked figures were silent now, their heads all turning toward me in unison. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me, the silence somehow worse than the sound. My vision blurred at the edges, and I stumbled back again, bumping into one of the figures. He, or it, didn't move. Then Blake spoke again, his voice calm, almost soothing. "The ritual is complete, Ethan. You've been chosen. You should feel honored." I looked at him, disoriented. What did you do to me?" "You're bound to us now," Blake said simply. "Phi Sigma Delta has claimed you." "Claimed me?" I shook my head. "This isn't right. I need to get out of here." I turned toward the stairs, but the cloaked figures moved, silently, as though gliding, blocking my path. My pulse raced, and I stumbled back into the center of the room. Blake's calm demeanor didn't waver, but there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You can't leave yet, Ethan," he said. "There's still more to learn. More to see." As he spoke, the symbols on the floor flared brighter. The light they gave off was unnatural, casting deep, jagged shadows that seemed to stretch and twist. And then I noticed something else. The symbols weren't just glowing. They were moving. The lines shifted, pulsing like veins, spreading outward across the stone like cracks. The walls trembled. I heard something then, a sound that rose up from below the basement. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, more distinct, until I realized what it was, a voice. Or perhaps many voices, all whispering at once. "Blake," I said, my voice shaking. "What is that?" He didn't answer. He just smiled as the whispering grew louder. The air around me felt heavy, suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I clutched my bleeding hand, my mind racing. This wasn't some fraternity tradition, this was something else. Something wrong. And then, as the whispers swelled to a roar, I heard a word. Just one word, but it echoed inside my head like a scream. My name. Ethan. The voice was deep, guttural, and inhuman. My knees buckled, and I fell to the floor. Around me, the cloaked figures stood motionless, their faces hidden in shadow. Only Blake moved, stepping toward me with that cold, knowing smile. "Don't fight it," he said softly. "It's already begun." "What's begun?" I gasped. Blake knelt in front of me, his face inches from mine. His eyes, once so human, were now black as pits, empty and endless. "You're awakening," he whispered. And then the world went black. I woke up gasping for air, as though I'd been drowning in an ocean of shadows. The cold stone floor pressed against my back, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. The basement was still dimly lit by those cursed lanterns, though the symbols on the ground no longer glowed. The air was thick, oppressive, like a storm break. I sat up too quickly, my head pounding as if a hammer had struck the inside of my skull. Every sound echoed unnaturally in my ears, the faint rustle of cloaks, the shuffle of footsteps. Around me, the cloaked figures stood still, their heads bowed, their faces hidden. And there was Blake, standing in the center of the room, watching me. "Welcome back, Ethan." His voice was calm, but hearing it sent a chill up my spine. I struggled to stand, my legs trembling beneath me. "What did you do to me?" Blake tilted his head, almost as if he were studying me. "We awakened something in you, something that was always there, waiting. It's part of the bond now." "What bond?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What the hell are you talking about?" He took a step closer, his polished shoes clicking softly against the stone floor. The ritual isn't just a tradition. It's a pact, a connection to something greater. Something older than all of us. I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. This is insane. I'm leaving. Blake sighed, as if I'd disappointed him. You still don't understand, do you? You can't just leave. You're part of us now. You've been marked. I froze. Marked? He gestured to my hand, the one I'd cut with the dagger. I looked down and felt my stomach drop. The wound was gone. In its place was a symbol etched into my palm, as though burned into the skin. It was the same symbol I'd seen painted on the floor, twisting and unnatural, like something alive. I rubbed at it frantically, trying to make it disappear, but the mark didn't budge. It was part of me. What did you do? I whispered, panic rising in my throat. I told you, Blake said, his voice low and steady. You've been chosen. This is your initiation, a gift. You've been granted a connection to something far beyond this world. I don't want it. I shouted, the words bouncing off the stone walls. Blake didn't flinch. You don't have a choice. The mark binds you to us, to Phi Sigma Delta, and to it. The way he said that last word, it, made my blood run cold. What is it? Blake smiled faintly, as though he were savoring a secret. You'll understand soon enough. Before I could respond, the basement door creaked open, and light from the house above spilled down the stairs. For a brief moment, the normal world intruded, laughter and music from the party upstairs. I saw two more figures enter the basement, their cloaks absent. They looked like normal students, chatting casually as they descended. One of them grinned when he saw me. Ah, fresh meat. The other chuckled and clapped Blake on the back. Is he ready? Almost, Blake replied, not taking his eyes off me. What the hell is this? I said, my voice trembling. What are you people? The two newcomers exchanged amused glances, as if my fear were nothing more than a punchline. Blake, however, remained serious. We're your brothers now, Ethan. You're real family. We'll take care of you. All you have to do is trust us. I shook my head, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I'm not staying here. I didn't sign up for this. Blake stepped closer, his voice lowering to a whisper. You can try to leave. But the mark will always bring you back. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I looked back down at my hand, at the burning symbol etched into my skin. It pulsed faintly, almost like a heartbeat. I felt sick. Get out of my way, I said, trying to sound stronger than I felt. To my surprise, Blake stepped aside, gesturing toward the stairs. Go ahead. Leave, if you think you can. I didn't wait. I bolted for the door, my footsteps echoing against the stone. I practically leapt up the stairs, taking them two at a time, until I burst into the hallway above. The music from the party was deafening, the house alive with drunken students and pulsing bass. For a split second, I thought I was free. But then the whispers started. At first, they were faint, like a breeze rustling through leaves. Then they grew louder, filling my ears, surrounding me. Ethan. Ethan. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. I looked around wildly, but no one else seemed to notice. The party continued as if nothing was wrong. Students laughed, danced, and shouted over the music. But their faces seemed off. Their smiles were too wide, their laughter too shrill. I turned and ran for the front door. The whispers followed me. Ethan, come back, you belong here. I burst through the front door and into the night air, gulping down breaths like I'd just surfaced from underwater. The fraternity house loomed behind me, its windows dark and watchful, like eyes. I didn't stop running until I reached my dorm. I locked the door behind me, my chest heaving. My roommate, Aaron, was sitting at his desk with headphones on. He turned, startled by the sound of me slamming the door. "Whoa, dude. You good?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't tell him what I'd just seen, what I'd just felt. He wouldn't believe me. Instead, I nodded shakily. "Yeah. I'm fine." Aaron raised an eyebrow. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I collapsed onto my bed, staring at the ceiling. My hand throbbed where the symbol had burned itself into my skin. I looked down at it again, hoping, praying, that it was gone. It wasn't. Instead, it was darker now, more pronounced, as if it had sunk deeper into my flesh. "You can try to leave," Blake had said. "But the mark will always bring you back." I closed my eyes, but the whispers were still there, soft and insidious, curling around the edges of my mind. "Ethan, you belong to us now." And no matter how hard I tried to ignore them, they wouldn't stop. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the whispers grew louder, their voices wrapping around my thoughts like vines. My room felt colder than usual, the shadows stretching unnaturally across the walls. I kept staring at the mark on my hand, willing it to disappear, but it remained as dark and vivid as ever. By dawn, I had convinced myself of one thing: I needed help. The campus was already stirring when I left the dorm, the early risers heading to the library or jogging around the quad. I wandered aimlessly at first, unsure where to go or who to talk to. The logical part of me said I was overreacting, that I should go to the campus health center and tell them I was having some kind of breakdown. But the mark on my palm burned every time I thought about it, a searing reminder that whatever was happening wasn't just in my head. I found myself in front of the campus chapel, a small, unassuming building nestled between two academic halls. I didn't even remember walking there, but something about the place felt safe. Inside, the air was cool and still. Rows of wooden pews stretched toward an altar at the front, where a stained glass window depicted a saint standing triumphantly over some monstrous figure. The faint smell of incense lingered in the air. "Can I help you?" The voice startled me. I turned to see an older man in a clerical collar standing near the doorway. His face was lined with age, but his eyes were sharp, almost piercing. I don't know," I stammered. "I think something's wrong with me." He studied me for a moment, then gestured toward a pew. "Come. Sit." I hesitated but eventually sat down, my hands gripping the edge of the bench. He sat beside me, his movements deliberate and calm. "Tell me what's troubling you," he said. I hesitated again. What could I say? That I'd been roped into a sinister ritual by a fraternity and now had a mysterious mark burned into my hand? That I was hearing voices whispering my name? "It's hard to explain," I began. "Start where you can," he said gently. So I told him. Not everything, just enough. The fraternity, the initiation, the mark. His expression remained neutral as I spoke, but when I mentioned the mark, something flickered in his eyes. "Let me see your hand," he said. I hesitated but extended my palm. The priest leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he examined the symbol. I expected him to dismiss it as a tattoo or a prank, but instead, he muttered something under his breath, a prayer, maybe? His hands trembled slightly as he traced the edges of the mark without touching it. "This isn't just a mark," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's a seal." "A seal?" I asked, my throat dry. He nodded, his gaze still fixed on my hand. "A binding. They've tied you to something, something not of this world." I felt my stomach drop. "What does that mean? Can you get rid of it?" He sat back, his expression troubled. "This isn't a simple matter, my son. Whatever ritual they performed was not of God. It's ancient, older than anything I've encountered. To break this bond would require great effort, and great risk." I stared at him, my pulse hammering in my ears. "So what do I do?" The priest hesitated, as if weighing his words carefully. "You need to leave that fraternity. Cut all ties with them. Whatever they've done to you, it will only grow stronger the longer you remain connected to them. That's what I'm trying to do, I said, my voice rising. But they said I can't leave. That the mark will bring me back. His face darkened. They are counting on your fear. But you have a choice, Ethan. You can fight this. You must fight this. His words stayed with me as I left the chapel. For the first time since the initiation, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was a way out of this, a way to reclaim my life. But that hope was short-lived. When I returned to my dorm, the door was slightly ajar. I stopped in the hallway, my heart pounding. I knew I'd locked it before I left. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The room was empty, at least at first glance. Aaron's side was a mess of textbooks and clothes, as usual, but my side was undisturbed. Except for one thing. Sitting on my desk was the dagger. The same black-bladed dagger I'd used in the ritual. Its surface shimmered faintly, as if it were alive. I backed away, my breath catching in my throat. No. No, no, no. I hadn't taken the dagger from the basement. I was sure of that. But here it was, waiting for me like a curse I couldn't escape. The whispers started again, faint but insistent. Ethan, take it, you need it. I clenched my fists, willing the voices to stop, but they only grew louder. My vision blurred at the edges, the room spinning around me. And then I heard it. A knock at the door. 3 sharp, deliberate knocks. I froze, the whispers fading into a tense silence. The knock came again, louder this time. Ethan, a voice called from the other side. It was Blake. I backed away from the door, my pulse racing. Go away. The doorknob rattled. Come on, Ethan. Let's talk. I said go away. The door stopped rattling, but Blake's voice was calm, almost amused. You can't hide forever. The mark won't let you. I glanced at the dagger on the desk, its blade gleaming in the dim light. Something deep inside me, some primal instinct, told me that if I didn't act now, I'd lose whatever chance I had left. I grabbed the dagger, the cold metal sending a shock through my hand. The whispers surged back, louder than ever. Good, Ethan, good. Blake laughed softly, as though he could hear them too. See? You're already starting to understand. The bond is stronger than you think. I gripped the dagger tightly, my mind racing. If you come through that door, I said, my voice shaking, I swear I'll. You'll what? Blake interrupted, his tone mocking. Hurt me? Kill me? You're not ready for that. The door fell silent, the air around me thick with tension. I stood frozen, the dagger trembling in my hand. And then, without warning, the lights in the room flickered. The shadows on the walls twisted, growing longer, darker, until they seemed to move on their own. The whispers rose to a deafening roar, and I felt the mark on my palm burn like fire. The last thing I heard before everything went black was Blake's voice, calm and assured. Don't fight it, Ethan. You're one of us now. I woke up to the sound of murmuring voices. My eyes opened to darkness, the faint glow of the symbols from the basement flickering around me like dying embers. My body felt heavy, sluggish, as though I'd been drugged. I was lying on the cold stone floor, my hands bound in front of me with coarse rope. The murmuring voices grew louder, their rhythmic chant reverberating through my skull. I turned my head, my vision swimming, and saw them, the cloaked figures, encircling me like vultures around a carcass. Their faces were still hidden, but their movements were precise, deliberate, as they gestured in time with the chant. Blake stood at the center of the circle, his hood pulled back, revealing his sharp, confident features. In his hands, he held the black dagger. Its blade pulsed with the same crimson glow as the symbols on the floor, the light seeming to twist and writhe like smoke. You fought it, Ethan, he said, his voice cutting through the chant like a blade. I respect that. Most don't. But the mark doesn't lie. It chose you. You belong here, whether you like it or not. "Let me go," I rasped, my voice hoarse. Blake's smile was faint, almost pitying. "I can't do that. You've already taken the first step. The ritual is incomplete, and until it's finished, the bond will consume you. It'll tear you apart from the inside." "I don't care," I shouted, struggling against the ropes. "I never wanted this. I don't want to be part of your sick cult." Blake sighed, his expression softening. "It's not a cult, Ethan. It's a legacy. A brotherhood that spans centuries. We're not just some college fraternity, we're part of something far greater than this world. And now, so are you." The others resumed their chant, the words guttural and alien, sending shivers down my spine. I felt the mark on my palm pulse in time with the rhythm, the pain growing sharper with each beat. Blake knelt beside me, his voice lowering to a whisper. "This next part will be difficult. But once it's over, you'll understand. You'll see the truth." I spat at him, the glob landing just shy of his polished shoe. "I'll never be one of you." He straightened, unfazed. "They all say that at first." The chanting grew louder, the air around me vibrating with energy. The symbols on the floor flared brighter, their light filling the room with an unnatural crimson glow. I felt a pressure building in my chest, like something trying to claw its way out. And then I heard it again. The voice. Deep and guttural, echoing from the shadows. "Ethan." It wasn't just speaking to me, it was inside me. I clamped my eyes shut, trying to block it out, but the voice only grew louder. Images flashed through my mind, faces I didn't recognize, places I'd never been, horrors I couldn't comprehend. When I opened my eyes, the room had changed. The cloaked figures were still there, but the walls of the basement were gone, replaced by a vast, endless void. The floor beneath me stretched out infinitely in every direction, its surface slick and black like obsidian. Above us, the sky churned with crimson clouds, streaks of lightning illuminating the darkness. And then I saw it. Rising from the void, towering over us like a living nightmare, was a form I couldn't fully comprehend. It was a mass of writhing shadows, its shape constantly shifting, its edges blurred and undefined. Eyes, hundreds of them, opened across its surface, their glowing red gaze locking onto me. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Blake's voice cut through the chaos, steady and reverent. "Behold, Ethan. The one who grants us power. The one who ensures our legacy." The creature, or whatever it was, seemed to pulse in response, its form leaning closer. The air grew heavier, pressing down on me like a physical weight. "You've been chosen," Blake continued, his eyes gleaming with fervor. "Chosen to serve. To feed the bond." "No!" I screamed, my voice finally breaking free. Blake ignored me, raising the dagger high above his head. The blade burned with crimson light, the symbols on its surface shifting like living things. "Your sacrifice will seal the pact, ensuring our strength for a generation." I thrashed against the ropes, desperation surging through me. "You don't have to do this. There has to be another way." Blake's smile was cold. "There's no other way. The pact demands blood." He brought the dagger down. But before it could pierce my chest, I felt the mark on my palm blaze with sudden heat. A wave of energy surged through me, so powerful it made my vision blur. The ropes binding me snapped like threads, and I rolled out of the way just as the dagger plunged into the floor where I'd been lying. The impact sent a shockwave through the void, the ground cracking and splintering beneath us. The creature let out a deafening roar, its eyes narrowing in rage. Blake stumbled back, his composure faltering for the first time. "What are you doing?" I didn't know. I acted on instinct, gripping the dagger's handle and ripping it free from the ground. The blade was hot in my hand, its crimson glow intensifying as I held it. The whispers in my head screamed louder now, but they were no longer a cacophony, they were a chorus, clear and unified. "Fight." I turned toward Blake, who stared at me in disbelief. "Ethan, don't." But I didn't hesitate. I lunged at him, the dagger slicing through his cloak and into his shoulder. He cried out, stumbling back as the cloaked figures broke formation, their chanting dissolving into chaos. The creature roared again, its form writhing violently. The void around us began to collapse, the crimson clouds churning faster, the ground splitting into jagged pieces. Blake fell to his knees, clutching his wound. "You don't understand what you've done," he gasped. "Without the pact, it'll consume us all." I didn't care. I turned toward the creature, the dagger in my hand burning brighter than ever. Its countless eyes fixed on me, their gaze filled with rage and hunger. My heart pounded as I raised the blade, the whispers in my mind urging me forward. I didn't know if I could kill it. I didn't even know if it could be killed. But I plunged the dagger into the ground, into one of the glowing symbols that pulsed beneath the creature's form. The reaction was immediate. The void erupted in a blinding light, the creature letting out a final, deafening roar as its form dissolved into shadows. The cloaked figures screamed as they were pulled into the collapsing void, their bodies vanishing one by one. Blake's voice was the last thing I heard, filled with anger and despair. "You've doomed us all, Ethan." And then, silence. I woke up on the quad, the morning sun warm against my face. The fraternity house was gone. Not just empty, gone, as if it had never existed. Students walked by, oblivious, laughing and chatting as though nothing had happened. I looked down at my hand. The mark was still there, faint but visible, like a scar that would never fully heal. The whispers were gone. But deep down, I knew the fight wasn't over. Whatever I had unleashed, whatever I had severed myself from, it wasn't gone. Not entirely. And it was only a matter of time before it found me again.